This is module 3, Intratextual Annotation. In our earlier module, we have already described what is extratextual annotation, how it can be carried out, what kind of information should be tagged, and what are the basic functional relevances of those extratextual annotations. Now, we are going into the intratextual level of annotation. To be precise, there are several ways of annotations by which a text can be annotated or tagged. And each type of annotation is so elaborate, so complex in nature, and so layered in applications that it is not possible to describe each one of them in finer details in this module. So, what we have decided here is that we'll try to highlight the major types of annotations and highlight some of the salient features of annotations so that we can have very rudimentary idea what it is all about, how it is done, what purpose it serves, and what kind of information can be extracted from those annotations. So broadly here we have taken into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 type of annotations here. They are orthographic annotation, prosodic annotation, grammatical annotation, semantic annotation, discourse annotation, and lastly here anaerobic annotation. So we are thinking we should concentrate on those 4 or 6 different types of orthographic annotation. First is orthographic annotation. First point has to be noted here that orthographic annotation is applied only in written text. So it can be applied on written text corpus or a spoken text which has already been rendered or transcribed or transcribed into written text. So orthographic annotation normally applied on a written text corpus or the transcripted version of the speech corpus. Now the first point we need to take care of that if we take a written text, what are the orthographic symbols can be found here? We know that there are characters. Those characters constitute vowels, consonants, clusters, punctuation marks, other various types of symbols, letters, grapheme, allographs, and many other things. So if you make a list, we can find out there are characters, letters, graphemes, allographs, diacritic marks, punctuation symbols, other unique symbols, other iconic symbols, plus signs, mathematical symbols, and various other kinds of symbols into a text, particularly if this is a printed or public text. And we also know very clearly that each character or a symbol used in the text has its specific function in the text itself. It has a special syntactic or linguistic value, linguistic role to be executed in the text. If we take for granted, they say, what about the vowels? We know that all vowel graphics, particularly if we look into the Indian texts, we know that there are vowels have specific positional usages, specific type of shapes, special design, and they don't occur in all places of texts. Also, we have a large list of vowel allograms, which are often used with consonants or consonant clusters to form words. So they have vowel graphemes, vowel allographs, consonant graphemes, consonant graphic variants, consonant clusters, and other diacritic markers which are normally found to be used in texts. They have each one of which has a specific function, specific role. That is why they are used in the text. We also find a large number of punctuation marks, which are also used in the text. And we also know very clearly that each punctuation mark in the text has its specific linguistic function. There are many other iconic symbols which are found to be used in any normal corpus. Say you can find out plus sign, minus sign, greater than sign, equal sign, arrow, and many other mathematical symbols and signs which are used here. Then quotation marks, double quotation, single quotation, italics forms of the texts, bold face of the text. So a lot of things are actually represented when a text is being produced. Now these are additional information, additional properties which has been there into the text. So besides those marks and characters in digital version of the text, space is an important character all the time. So you have to keep in mind that these characters which are visually visualized are identified as characters used in a text. At the same time, you have to take into account that space, empty space between words, is also an important character here in the digital text. So at the time of orthographic annotation, what we do is that we try to identify all those symbols, all those characters, all those signs which are used in the text, identify them, mark them, locate their positions, and identify their functions in the text. So basic task of orthographic annotation is to mark out those punctuation marks, those symbols, mathematical symbols, or other kinds of symbols, also other diacritics that are used into the text. So this is very much required for understanding of the texts. So as you also know that particularly in cases of Indian text, we don't have any distinction between capital letters and small letters. But in an English text, particularly written in Roman scripts, we find that there is a use of capital letters and small letters within the same text, and the use of capital letters are already preconditioned, predefined, in which text where the capital letters will be used and where non-capital letters will be used. What I identify here, what I argue here is that we have various different types of characters and symbols to be used in a text which is produced in printed or published form. So since each of those characters has specific role, specific function, we need to mark them accurately. So in cases of orthographic annotation, what we do is that to identify those characters and mark their functions accurately. The next is prosodic annotation. This kind of annotation is normally applied on spoken text. So prosodic features are actually available in speech. There is no chance to get it in written form. So prosodic annotation we apply on the spoken text. When a spoken text is, or a speech is transcribed and converted into a spoken text, spoken corpus, we need to mark out the features of speech. As you know that in a random sequence, as in a normal situation, there are many unique prosodic features in text, like such as stress, intonation, pause, fillers, non-beginnings, and many other properties. Repetitions, additional noises. So a lot of things actually come into the picture. Repetitions, contraction, half end, non-ends, non-beginnings. So all those properties need to be captured adequately in the spoken version, in the written versions of the text. So we need to have unique symbols to mark out the features of speech. Suppose we can have specific symbols that indicates the stress or the boosters. We can also have its specific symbols similarly for tones or tonal variation, also for rising tone, falling tone, rising falling tone, falling rising tone. Also, you should have specific symbols to indicate pauses, to indicate repetitions, to indicate non-ends, to indicate false starts, so to indicate non-beginnings. So we can also need to refer or have the symbols to refer to pillars. Also, we need tone unit, identify tone units, the contextual comments, or enclose certain uncertain materials, or which is normally identified as noise in a speech text. So we need a whole range of symbols, unique symbols, which need to be applied on the written version of the spoken text to identify where those properties can be marked out and utilized. The Lancaster IM spoken English corpus is a very good example where you can find out all the properties of speech are graphically represented in the written versions of the speech. So this talks about the representation of sound elements or speech elements, or properties of speech in written versions. So prosodic annotation actually tries to capture all the properties of speech which has been normally observed in normal discourse or normal dialogic interactions in the speech. The third type of annotation is called grammatical annotation, which is more frequently, more commonly known as parts of speech tagging. What we do, I'll also in subsequent modules I'll discuss in details about these parts of speech tagging, but here in sum or in brief we can tell is that parts of speech tagging is basically a kind of annotation mechanism, annotation system where each and every word and multi-word strings in a piece of text is assigned to a specific only one parts of speech in which the word is found to be used in the text. So this can be done either manually or automatically or semi-automatically. So it can be a rule-based approach, or it can be statistics-based approach, or example-based approach, or corpus-based approach. There are various ways to do this task. But the basic thing is identify a word, identify its composite full structure, identify its syntactic role in the language, in the particular text, or its parts of speech, then assign that particular parts of speech in which the word is used in the text. So although it sums up likely a very simple mechanism, in fact is a very complex task to carry out this task or work of assigning parts of speech to the words in a language. So far we know there are some statistical based models or automatic tagger for many of the advanced languages in English, in French, in German, in Spanish, Portuguese, and many other languages. But to be true, develop a good parts of speech tagger for many of the Indian languages is still a dream. Even those parts of speech tagger which has been developed for some of the Indian languages are not so robust that the level of accuracy is not very promising. Because there are many important issues related to the text, related to the parts of speech, related to the identification of the words, related to the structure, related to the algorithm. A lot of issues are involved with it, which has not yet been properly adequately solved to develop an automatic parts of speech. As a result of it, you don't have much post-tagged texts or corpora available for Indian languages. Only a few are available, that too in a very recent past, because of certain projects undertaken by some consortiums in which I'm also a member, and there we have tried to develop some tag sets and applied on those tag sets on the corpus and generate a certain amount of data. But at the same time, we must admit that the data which has been generated in a semi-supervised manner using the parts of stagger is not altogether error-free. There are areas where questions may be raised. There are places where doubts can be raised, where there are places where counter opinions can be raised regarding assigning a specific parts of speech to that particular word used in a particular syntactic construct. So keeping aside all those debates aside, it can be said that parts of speech tagging on principle is a complex task, is a very challenging task, and success in this area will come from many domains. Means you need a collective knowledge and huge experience to deal with that. But the basic task is something that identification of words, its exact morphosyntactic role in the sentence, and assign its parts of speech accordingly in the text word, either automatically or mechanically. Next is semantic annotation. So when in parts of grammatical annotation, we try to assign the parts of speech to the words. In semantic annotations, we identify the meaning of the words. That also can be done automatically. But in present, the system is not even developed in advanced languages, so that it can be done automatically. So some manual samples, some texts are done manually to train the system, and some resources are already being generated where words are actually marked with their functions. What it does happen. So in semantic annotation, what are the basic two tasks are that it aims to identify the semantic information of words used in a text. If a word is used as a noun, that is identified through parts of speech stagger, the semantic annotator wants to identify, okay, this is a place name, or this is a person name, or this is item name, or this is a emotion or an abstract noun or something like that. So more level of semantic knowledge is being embedded into that. So semantic annotation actually tries to identify the meaning of the word used in the text. Also, this also wants to assign the exact sense the word is denoting in the text. So semantic annotation tries to identify the noun, or it is a person. It also wants to identify that this is actually working as a subject in the sentence. Suppose if I say the car is running in high speed, or say Delhi is 100 kilometers away from say 1000 kilometers away from Kolkata, then what happens? Now we can identify here that Delhi is a noun, Kolkata is a noun, and at the same time in semantic annotation we want to identify that Delhi is a place name, Calcutta is a place name, and in this sentence Calcutta, Delhi is used as a subject. So all the whole load of information we want to identify through semantic annotation. So it exhibits the semantic relationships underlying between words in the text also. This is a little higher level of annotation, to be honest, which is generally marked up by agent-person relationship. Ram killed Ravana. We want to identify what kind of grammatical semantic agent-person relationship between that. Whether Ram is agent, Ravana is person, something like that. Or he ate a banana, and how he is a person, agent, and banana is a person, or something like that. So semantic annotation tries to go beyond parts of level. So it doesn't identify the parts of speech. Rather, it wants to identify the meaning or the sense the word actually denotes in the text. Also looking at the properties or its agent-person relationship or subcategories. So semantic annotation is basically a more complex, more higher level of annotation, which is normally done manually to make a initial database which is mostly apt for machine learning or can be used for machine learning purposes, can be used as a trial database. So far there is not much works done on semantic annotation, but this is an important area where it can be done. The next issue is discourse annotation. Discourse annotation is entirely in contrast with grammatical and semantic annotations. It takes a different route to annotate the discourse structures of text. So whenever we are trying to identify the discourse, we need to identify the discourse elements also. It wants to identify the discourse elements and pragmatic elements, how they're combined. So when we know that a text has taken place or dialogue has taken place, we need to identify who are the participants in the dialogue, who are the interactors, what are the topic of the discussion, at what place it was taking place, what are the motive behind that, at what time it took place, what are the purpose it was serving, what are the goal of the interlocutors. So a lot of other pragmatic and discursive issues are involved into it. So it would be a tremendous helpful if we can identify the discourse elements embedded into the text. So to be honest, identifying the tag sets for discourse tag is a very difficult task. Not much effort, not much success is yet achieved there. But people have been trying to do that. We know that nearly a few years ago, Anna Britta Stenston tried to identify some discourse categories, discourse markers. So she identified 10 major discourse markers which are relevant to be used for discourse tag. Suppose he said that inside the text, if you come across some examples of something like that, then that can be marked as a discourse tag. I'm giving here these examples, some very interesting examples. You can look at that. That if you find that in a text there is some expressions like sorry, excuse me, etc., then let those terms be marked as a discourse tag as apology. Similarly, the tags confirmation carries example yeah, in it, sure, something like that. Then in cases okay, right, fine for emphasis, well, enough, nice, it's for evaluation, hello, hi, wow, it's for type of greetings. And in cases of phrases, I kind of sort of kind of things. So this is basically called the haze markers in discourse. Okay, dear, honey, my love. So it's let's say permissions. Then please, dear, it's for marker of politeness. Oh really, that's true. It's responses, exactly. Or really, absolutely, exactly, verification markers. So Stanstrom identified these 10 different discourse markers and discourse tags to be used. But this is more or less quite simplified. So we can identify in a speech corpus, these are the most frequently used in speech. So in cases of spoken text, these discourse markers may be quite useful to identify what kind of text is developed. But in cases of written text, it is not very easy to identify those discourse markers because most often these are not so explicitly present in those texts. So what happens? We need to identify some cues wherefrom we can identify the discourse markers. So recently, Carlson and his team has proposed certain discourse markers, something like that referring and attributive expressions and co-reference in text can be identified, marked as discourse marker. Spatial and temporal expressions and spatial temporal relations, anaphoric and elliptic expressions and their discourse dependencies, discourse units and their relations to one another, information structure themes and themes that license them, discourse conventions and what they construct, discourse contexts of interpretations, cognitive accessibility of scales, like animacy, non-animacy. The types of speech like direct, indirect, free, indirect, and many other things. So what happens when people have identified some discourse markers and they want to put those inside the text. But it is yet to be decided, yet to be finalized how those discourse markers can be placed and how that can be misunderstood so that this can be easily removed from the text and can be understood both by men and women. So basic problem of discourse annotation is that there are still many unexplored grounds which has not yet been explored about theoretical applicational points of discourse markers in the text. What we understand is clear that a text needs to be marked at the discourse level. So we need to identify the discourse markers. We have to identify the tags for discourse. We also identify what kind of discourse markers should be retrieved or should be marked within a spoken text or a written text, and how those should be marked and understood. So there are various important issues involved in the discourse annotations. So since it is far more complex a task, it is not yet done for many of the advanced languages, but there has been some effort to do that. For Indian languages, there is no text which has been marked at the discourse level. The last one here, we are talking about anaphoric annotation. As you know that anaphora is a very complex linguistic phenomena that usually refers to a linguistic expression, the interpretation of which depends upon another expression occurring in the same text or within the same sentence or across the texts. So what we are doing in anaphoric annotations, what we are trying to do, 3 or 4 specific goals are there. We need to follow. Number 1, identification of the pronominal forms and adverbial forms, which are basically anaphora. Identifications of cases of ellipses, elliptical subject, elliptical object, nominal phrases with nominal complement but with elliptical height. So these are important losses, ellipses, which also need to be marked in anaphora. Identifications of relation between the anaphoric expressions of direct and bridging antecedent, and marking the relations between the expressions to detect their co-reference chains in texts. So what we are trying to do in anaphora relations is to identify those elements in the text which are in anaphoric relations. So anaphora can be expressed within the sentences or across the sentences. Suppose normally what happens, if I give an example, that Ram is a boy, he goes to school, he has 2 brothers, all of them go to school with him. So ultimately at the evening, Ram comes back to school. If we look at this very simple constructions like that, so that the first sentence, Ram is a boy, he goes to school. The second sentence, he actually refers to Ram and nobody else. So we need to identify a strategy that here in the second sentence, the pronoun he actually refers to Ram. Or he has brothers, they go to schools, and his father works in office. So here he, and all those things actually relates to the noun Ram. So anaphoric relations actually tries to identify which elements, antecedents, are actually linked up to precedents, and what kind of lapses are actually taking place. So I went to the market and bought a pen. In these sentences, actually there is a loss, there is an eclipse, that I went to market and I bought a pen. Those 2 sentences are actually combined together. So here the second side, I bought a sentence, a pen is actually I bought it, the subject part is missing. There is an eclipse. So our task is in anaphoric annotations to identify those things. So we are trying to identify those pronominal forms, antecedent, definite, which are linked to each other. Also trying to identify what kind of co-reference they has. If I give an example here, you can find out, suppose Ram met Rahim and asked him to call his brother. If you look at this sentence, the second one that he asked him to call his brother. Now the question is, who is his? Is Ram's brother or Rahim's brother? So in anaerobic analysis, if it is say Ram is marked as I, Rahim is marked as J, then he has to be marked as either I or J accordingly. If Ram is actually asking to call Rahim Ram's brother, then this should be marked with I. Or if Ram wants Rahim to call Rohim's brother, then it should marked with J. So what I say is that in the context, in the text, there are many such situations where this kind of constructions are very much easily available in the text. At the anaphoric level, we are trying to identify all kinds of anaphoric expressions which are used and how they are linked up with each other. So this gives a better kind of understanding of the text. So what it stands now is that in most of the cases, we have the 6 type of annotations which we have discussed here. Not much work done in Indian languages. Although we can find out some texts which are annotated at the parts of speech level or the grammatical level, other types of annotations are not yet applied in Indian languages. And because of this paucity, because of this laxity in the part of the researchers, we don't have any corpus of other types of annotations. But since these are quite challenging areas, maybe the young generations of scholars who are coming to work in the area of linguistics or language technology or language data management, language texts studies, perhaps look into these areas and generate some texts of different annotated types for future use in all kinds of linguistic research and development projects. Thank you.